සිනමා අධ්‍යක්ෂය වගේම මාහිමි විචාරකයෙකු මාධ්‍යවේදිකවන තිස්සා අබේසේකරයන්ට අප ඉතාමත්ම කරුණාදරව පෙරදරිව අරමුණු කර සිටිනවා. legacy පිළිබඳ ඔබතුමාගේ නිර්වචනය ප්‍රකාශ කරන ලෙස. The hero of this occasion, Mr. Ananda Liyanage and his wife, Mrs. Liyanage, members of his family, friends, and colleagues. Anyone who listened to Peter Almeida introducing Ananda would never have associated the person who was being portrayed as being a writer. I think Peter realized that probably and tried to make amends at the end to say that Ananda was not only a trade unionist and an ex-banker, but also a person who was intensely interested in literature, even during times when he was busy organizing strikes. Well, I had the same feeling in a different context. When my friend Bangula Nana Karavasan had called my wife and said that he wishes me to make the keynote address at the launch of a book written in English. My wife didn't quite explain to me what the novel or the story or the book was all about, but she said it's something to do with history and legend and things like that. Now, Bangula is a dear friend, and I also know that Bangula would not sort of put me into an embarrassing situation where I would be forced to speak about a book which I don't like. So I thought maybe if Bangula wants me to speak, then he must have thought that the book is worth talking about. But each time I am called upon to speak about a book at its launch, I get trapped in a catch-22 situation. Even though I do not wish to say no to anyone, in fairness to myself, as well as to those who would listen to me, it is important that I am convinced that the book is worth talking about. So when Bangula brought his friend Ananda Liyanage home, my qualms were increased because I was introduced to a person who was a trade unionist, a banker, a man who created enormous problems for his employers. Now that is one thing that endeared me to him, because I have had my conflicts with authority myself, but in spite of the fact that I have also dabbled in politics myself and left politics at that, I sometimes wondered whether this book will contain enough excitement at least for me to speak something substantial and sensible about it. Trade unionists and storytellers don't go together, because trade unionists don't tell stories, they go into action. Bankers don't pause to tell stories, they count figures. So both these distanced Ananda from the kind of activity that is and the kind of imagination that a storyteller needs to be successful. So it is with a certain amount of hesitation that I began to read the book. I was quite simply a bit nervous because I kept on telling myself, let this book be something interesting, at least on a very germinal level, so that I could speak about it. To say that I was pleasantly surprised would be a gross understatement. I'm being very honest about this. I was bowled over totally and completely. I'm being very, very frank. This is a magnificent story. I make that statement with great deliberation, care and thought. There are two words there I wish to draw your attention to. One is the word magnificent, the other is the word story. I wouldn't call it anything else, because if you say great, I would have to justify that statement in terms of academic literary criticism, which discards the time-honored principle that a book must entertain. I may wish to call it a novel because this is not a novel in the academic sense. A story is a story is a story. Ramayana is a great, fabulous story. It is not a novel. The Iliad is a fabulous, epic story. It is not a novel. Don Quixote's book, famous book, is a great story, but not a novel. Cervantes in Don Quixote is a great story, but not a novel. According to critics, it is the last great story in European literature. Then came the novel. The novel, they say, came with Robinson Crusoe, where everything is of this world. Everything is that which can be touched, is that which can be seen, is that which can be heard. The world of imagination began to recede from the great stories. As Walter Benjamin, the great German literary critic, said, the novel killed the grand old story. Today, orthodox academic literary criticism talks about the novel and not about the story. As E.L. Forster, the great writer who wrote the definitive book on the art of the novel, gets a hypothetical character in his analysis to say with a great amount of apology, oh dear, yes, a novel tells a story, as if it is a very bad thing. Oh dear, yes, a novel tells a story. It's like as if, well, it is a bad thing, but you can't help it. So you read tomes about literary criticism, dealing with stories where the story is not touched upon. It is characterization, it is social reality. Actually, not only the novel, but I think it is Freud who killed the story. Because most of modern fiction is a matter of trying to probe deep within the psyche of its characters rather than place them against a broad, big, beautiful earth and the sky above, which is what all the grand old stories, from Mahabharata to Ramayana to the Jataka stories, did. So, what I'm trying to do now is to explain to you that this book takes you right back to that world of grand storytelling, where a story encompasses and encodes within itself the whole of the universe, the whole of life. Now, there may be people who try to trap the whole of life and the whole of the universe within a story that will fall flat on their faces. But here is a writer who obviously is born with this gift, because it is not an easy task, I must tell you, as someone who tries to write stories. I avoid the word fiction, because even in my case, even though my stories are small, I try to narrate them like the way the ancients did, like the way our grandmas did when they wanted to put us to sleep or to make us eat our food. There is in this book, I found the voice of the old narrator. And that narrator has his genesis in the Neanderthal man who had to keep his flock awake through the dark night so that they would not be destroyed and eaten by wild animals. I heard the voice of 17-year-old Sherazade, the girl who kept a mad Arabian king awake for 1,001 nights because he didn't want to fall asleep in the night for fear that he would lose his crown. This little girl, I think Arabian Nights, the 1,001 Nights, is the final testimony of good storytelling. You will agree with me that the moment we invented the word novel, we are trying to say that we are not telling a story, but we are doing something else. Why? All over the world, the greatest writers writing today are turning back to the tone, the structure, and the form of that grand old story. Though not quite in this fashion, in their various ways. Take Gabriel Garcia Marquez, take Toni Morrison of America, you take Milan Kundera, you take Salman Rushdie. But even though Salman Rushdie, who wrote Midnight Stillman and later Satanic Verses, confessed once that his art of storytelling is derived from the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, not from the Western novel. He is still not quite in the same mold, because you got to wade through a whole lot of social observation, of Freudian psychological insights to get at the story. Ian Foster, once again, to quote him, said that the plot, which is the heart of a story, a good story has to have a strong plot that traps you within its coils and takes you right up to the end, makes you forget yourself. He says that in the modern novel, the plot is like a tapeworm, which lies wriggling underneath the vast mass of psychological insights, characterization, blah blah and whatnot. But to me, in this book, The plot is like a gigantic python which holds you with terrible coils without letting you even breathe. Now, I go on talking like this about Ananda's wonderful story, this grand, marvelous story. And let me also I must confess that I started reading it, wanting to skip through it, but I was completely and totally trapped in the coils of this massive serpent, so that I stopped it halfway. So then, I am speaking without knowing how it ends. And that's precisely what I should be doing today, because I shouldn't tell you the end. And then let me speak about the story itself. It begins, the story itself, if I narrate it this, it's not the way it is narrated in the book. It starts with the discovery of a stone slab which has an inscription in which it is stated that the crypt of Bitugamini lies somewhere, and there are 4 markers leading to that point. I hope I am doing right, Ananda. Just read it through up these things only a few days back. But there are 4 markers leading up to where the crypt of Bitugamini lies hidden. Now, some archaeological excavators excavating for some agricultural constructions of the ancient hydraulic civilization chances upon a very unusual guard stone, which could be a guard stone which stood at the entrance to the south gate of the ancient citadel of Anuradhapura. Now, those who thought that this was something from the south gate of Anuradhapura, implied that the other 4 markers, the balance 3 markers should be the other 3 gates of Anuradhapura. So, an organization called Lanka Heritage, it is not very clearly specified whether it is semi-government or not, but still a very serious, very responsible organization called Lanka Heritage hires the services of 3 distinguished archaeologists headed by a man called Chandragupta, who in turn invite a woman archaeologist who could be in her middle 30s, closer to 40, Caroline Summer, because she has enormous experience doing this kind of labyrinthine excavations in the ancient civilizations of the Incas and the Aztecs of southern America. She is also the daughter of a very, very famous epigraphist, a man who deciphers, decodes ancient manuscripts. The all ancient manuscripts, and this is very important where this book is concerned, all ancient manuscripts, all ancient stories have a hidden code. This is very important for you to understand what I'm going to tell you now, because all great stories of the past are not to be taken on their face value. There's something underlying, and you've got to understand the markers. It is only then that the truth is revealed. It is not to be analyzed in the way that one analyzes the realistic novel of today, of which we are very, very proud. but it's a different art form. An art form which is almost lost to us until people like Ananda and others have started rediscovering it. And this young lady, the first thing she does is get the help of her father in England to decipher for her, to decode for her, that this is the original. I won't read the whole thing. Having done, now this is the English translation of the rock inscription that seems to hold the key to the crypt of Buddha. Having done battle on 28 occasions to establish a unified Lanka, and having achieved final victory in single combat over the usurper, the symbol of victory of King Abeysekera, that's Buddha, which accompanied and gave him wisdom in battle, is laid alongside him in acknowledgement of the accord of the deities. Then comes the key paragraph. The heaven themselves blazed forth the wings of a revived Sinhala in the month of Chitta. On his victorious entry on Anuradhapura from the south portal, which marks the fourth pillar that shall lead the perspicacious seeker to his side with the direction of divine forces. Now, that code has to be broken. It speaks, the code is hidden here. The heaven themselves blazed forth. What does that mean? And it says, the fourth pillar that shall lead the perspicacious seeker to his side with the direction of divine forces. Now, there is in this book later the English that shall lead the perspicacious seeker to his side with the direction of divine forces. Now what does that mean? What are the divine forces? Now there is a message to be read there. Just a minute. However, it is, I shall copy that later. That is, I'm finding it difficult to trace the particular page. But ultimately, it is understood that there is a certain cosmic pattern up in the skies to which certain constructions down below are related. The Orion, which is the divine constellation, is the one that is referred to, and they discover that the three Dagavas in Anuradhapura, that is Midisavatiya, Ruvanvalisaya, and Jetavana, or thereabouts, are in some kind, do follow some kind of cosmic pattern, and these are arranged in a particular order according to the heavens, and you've got to follow that order to come to the spot where the crypt is. Now, the book doesn't start with that search. It starts somewhere else. It starts in 404 BC. Just on the eve of Buddha-Gamini's death, he is staring out of his window of his palace to the night sky. No, it's a dawn sky. It's early dawn now. He has had a restless night. He has a premonition of death, and he is gazing at the stars, and he summons his brother Tissa, his heir, to his room, which is read out here as an excerpt. and points to a place and says that there we have to build a Dadava. And that is one order. The other is that he hatches a particular plan that he shall leave behind him his scepter, which can be owned only by someone who has the necessary qualities of leadership to rule this blessed land. So this scepter has something very, very significant about it. In it is embedded the relic of the great Tathagata. And the Nirusavati Dadava was once built on the site where this scepter once, when Vitugaminu struck it there, could not be dislodged by anyone. It could only be dislodged by Vitugaminu. So he wishes this to be the symbol of authority over this blessed land, over this holy land, as he calls it. And it is from there that where this script is going to be hidden is going to be a secret, only parts of which are to be known by one of 10 people. The 10 great warriors who accompanied Vitugaminu from Madhya on his historic march to Anuradhapura. Each person is given a little segment of a duty, which when added up would be the secret of this script. Now, it's a short chapter, short section at the beginning, the prelude, where Vitugaminu dies. Rangalisa is incomplete, but he is given the illusion of it being completed by draping it with white cloth, and then the story cuts straight back to time of present. And here we are in search of the crypt. The story is moving around this search. But what makes the search so terribly, terribly entertaining and so terribly interesting and compulsive reading is that he works, like in all great ancient stories, parallel strands that weave and interweave, come into conflict, draw back, come forth, like a grand symphony. There's counterpoint, there's chord work, there are movements, preludes, statement of the theme, development of the theme, recapitulation and coda. It's like that, it moves. Now what makes it interesting here is that when the archaeologists commissioned by the Lanka Heritage is after an archaeological treasure which would shed a lot of light over ancient Lanka, there are others who are trying to grab the crypt. Reasons totally different. The Prime Minister of the country wants to get hold of it, because that would assure him of his continued rule over this country. Here the Minister of Interior from the south, who has ambitions of becoming a ruler, he moves surreptitiously without being known by the Prime Minister.
There's a third force, that is the insurgent leader of the North. Of course, he is portrayed as someone who is not the same bloodthirsty monster that we have today, but someone after long years of struggle has realized that only peace and harmony between the two races could solve this problem.
He has sent his man to see that the crypt, if ever it is found, is not kept in Anuradhapura, but shifted to Colombo. that would, because keeping it in Anuradhapura might bring the borderline too close to their territory. But he feels that somehow it being further south, the center of power being further south, according to him, is what would create the necessary political balance, the ethnic balance in this country. The Prime Minister doesn't wish it to be taken to the south. He wants it in Colombo. Because that way, once again, so his motives are also very much like those of the rebel leader from the north. It is only the man from the south who seems to be on a different course. It's power hunger. I think there's power hunger in all three, but of different forms. Into this come the implementers, the law, the people, the chief implementing officers, the chief executive officer of these forces. There is Colonel Ravi Algana, who is serving his master, the Prime Minister. There is another man called Gunathilaka, who is the chief security officer of the Minister for the Interior. There is also a man called Kiru, I think. Right? Right. I remember the name now. Kiru, who is the representative of the Northern Force, and there is, of course, Caroline Summer, who is a professional, hardcore, dyed-in-the-wool archaeologist, who is only after history, is only after digging up the past. Between these four narrative movements, a grand story begins to unroll and weave itself into a grand, gigantic, canvas. But let me pause here for a minute to tell you another dimension which I detected. Maybe I don't know whether Ananda was aware of the dimension, but there are three levels in this story that I detected. There is a celestial level of the Orion and the constellation of the stars up there. There is the terrestrial level, and there is also a subterranean level. So there are three levels. Actually, in Sanskrit, I don't know, it's called Tribhuvan. Sky, the earth, and the subterranean underneath. I think the Orion and that is obviously the celestial strand, the layer, the level. Then in the middle strand, the second strand, I feel, are people like Buddhagamini, Tissa, all the great old, and the 10 warriors. I am sad to say that I would put the contemporary characters, the Prime Minister, the Minister, and Kiru, in the subterranean level. Because their ambitions, their motivations are totally and completely self-centered. Even when they think that they are trying to do something good for the country, they are only after power, glory, and self-promotion. Perhaps the characters like Caroline Summer and Ravi Algama are like characters in a Greek tragedy who are trapped among these three forces. And it's very easy for me to analyze it like this and tell you. But to design it like this, to construct a story like this, and to keep it moving all the time, I think is not a mean feat. It is something very, very few people can do. And I am being very, very frank, Ananda. It is something that very, very few people can do. They may have the ambition of writing big epic historical novels, but they just don't have the capacity. It's a capacity that comes from within. It is part of one's imagination, part of one's breadth of imagination. We all have our imaginations. But to have the breadth of vision and to keep yourself, you see, one of the main things about stories like this is that the author is hidden. There is never the first person singular anywhere here. You are outside it. You are only narrating very simply. The language is very simple. Almost simplistic. There are no convoluted sentences which have to be decoded in themselves. But the simple story hides almost all of the universe that we know of. I'm reminded of my English teacher who once detected my tendency to write long sentences when I was very young. I still do. And go for very rare words. He said, he first asked me whether I was a Buddhist or a Christian. I said, I'm a Buddhist. It doesn't matter, go and read the Bible. Why, sir? Take the second sentence in the Bible, the opening sentence. God said, let there be light, and there was light. Try putting it in any other way. Just try to put that in any other form to see if you can get it across. And can you see any word that you don't know of? It's the simplest of sentences. But it says something so beautifully and such great. And that is the kind of writing, because the vision itself belittles your language. It makes the language feel humble. The language doesn't try to draw attention to itself. It hides itself and allows the drama to unfold. Because the drama itself is grand. You don't have to dress it up in colorful garb. No unnecessary poetics. It's only the dramaturgy that moves and moves. It keeps moving. And the cutting back and forth, which I found amazingly sort of accurate. The sense of timing, where it shifts from the past to the present. And even in the present, when it shifts from one point to the other, it is to shift the narrative one point forward, never to step back. He may go back and forth in time, but is constantly moving forward. Now that is the mark of a great storyteller. And I can go on talking like this, but I think it's not right for me to speak, because the book will speak for itself. I think it's going to be a great read for everybody. People who are completely and totally sort of weary and exhausted by the kind of punditry of literary criticism, and people who still yearn for the simple old stories that our elders used to tell us. Within each one of us, there is still that little child. Like Steven Spielberg said, in all of us there is that little child who wants to wonder. And I am appealing to them. That is what Steven Spielberg said. And I must say that for a banker or a person who started his life or would have spent most of his time counting figures and bank statements, this imagination is out of the ordinary. It's a marvelous imagination which encompasses the whole of life. Now, as a final comment, let me tell you something which I have been quietly learning over the last 10-15 years, that the story has died, the epic has died, because the world has got fragmented. We don't see the earth and the sky and the thing below as one whole. It's fragmented. And our art, whether it be films, whether it be novels, whether it be short stories, whether anything you will find are about these fragments, never about the whole. Even these fragments do not give you an idea about what the whole is like. It is only then like what Robert Blake once said, if the dewdrop reflects the universe, which it does always, it is not worth. If you concentrate on the particular should always reflect the general. But what has happened today, we focus on the tiny little fragments. We start with the fragment and end with the fragment. The reader is never given the vision of the larger reality. Because our larger reality eludes almost all of us. But fortunately for us, there are people who still see things whole, like the ancients did. Valmiki did, Homer did, Shakespeare did, perhaps. Maybe Tolstoy. But as the art of storytelling proceeded, dramaturgy broke into a million splinters, the story became fragmented, they became petty, they became small. But there are still minds which seem to see the interaction between the subterranean, the terranean, and what is above us. And Ananda is a writer. I think he's a rare kind of writer in the sense that, as I said, he does not draw attention to himself at all. He is not a person who is exhibitionistic in any way. His language is not exhibitionistic, it's very simple. In the simplest of people could read it and be dazzled by it, be held by it to the very end. So when I told Ananda that turned into a movie, it would be a fantastic film. I didn't say it would be a fantastic film. I said it would cost a lot. Now, another book that comes to my mind at this point is the Da Vinci Code. The Da Vinci Code is a book I read almost when it was published, because a friend of mine brought it all the way from Canada for me to read. And I found it an impossibly manipulated, plotted story. But still I kept on reading. And as you know, it is structured on a similar thing, the Holy Grail. Now you know the Holy Grail. The Grail is supposed to be the cup which Jesus Christ used at the Last Supper and which is lost. And it seems to contain the legacy of Christ. And there has been a search for this. So any particular search, a long and difficult search for something lost, is called following the Holy Grail. The whole of the Da Vinci Code is structured around that concept, that myth. All great stories should be anchored on myths, otherwise they don't become great stories. The Mahavamsa has fantastic stories from which we can learn. The whole problem is that people do not know exactly how to read the Mahavamsa. When the great Tathagata was nearing his end at Kusinara under the sal trees, when he God summoned to his presence and says that right now 700 people are lost in the sea and floating with no direction. Please see to it that they are directed towards Lanka, because that is where my Dhamma is going to flourish. And the flotilla or the boats carrying Vijaya and his 700 follower companions drifting in the Indian Ocean suddenly turns towards Sri Lanka almost by some divine will, by some strange wind. It's a beautiful story. But beneath that story is a subtext. And it is a subtext that we have to get through. It is a story that holds you. But you must be intelligent enough to go underneath, to swim underneath, and understand the history of it. When the city of Kalani is inundated with a flood from the sea, drowns the whole land, and the sea gods in their wrath demand a virginal sacrifice. And the king's daughter, a young girl, is put on a festooned golden yacht and sets sail on the sea. And it drifts down and comes to Kirinda. And there she marries a man from the south, and Risu comes to reclaim the Rajarata and to unify the country. That whole thing is, you see, the unification of Sri Lanka, the rule of Maya and Pihite, which would have been ancient settlements under one scepter, is narrated in a wonderful story which even little children can understand and remember. We all know that, but it is left to the discerning reader to plow underneath and reach for the historical truth. And in this book, the past and the present, the sky and the earth combine to tell us a story of compelling power, but it is not pure entertainment. It also carries with it a certain awareness of the dark forces of history that are obviously lying in wait to pounce upon us if we follow the wrong path. So let me complete here, because I do not wish to go any further. I hope, Ananda, that you will be discovered by the world, that you will hit the best-selling list, and that you will become like a Sri Lankan writer once, I think it's who wrote a book called The Winds of Sinhala, Colin Silva. But his book, you are a far superior writer than Colin Silva could ever hope to be. And with that, and wishing you all the luck and all the fame and all the fortune, I take your leave. Thank you.